Hello again, Struck. Diablo Force Open beta tests start next weekend, and I'm already making some pre-launch theory-crafted semi-builds that should be good for fresh into endgame characters with the actually full-launched game. Not that great for the beta, but they can still be, to a certain degree, used in the beta for the first few skills, and all the way until the ultimate. I plan to evolve those builds into full-fledged setups when the game is fully released, and also to keep them updated with upcoming new seasons and rebalance updates. This is one such build for the Sorcerer Class called Starfall. Just a little bit of information about the beta. The beta test will only let us reach level 25 and only let us play for the first act zone called Fractured Peaks. So again, those builds, rather than being great for the beta, could be useful for the beta, but they should be very helpful for characters around level 50, 60 plus in the fully released game. I've used 63 points for this one, and there's rumors that 63 points was in the open world beta, the limit of skill points. Hopefully, when the game fully launches, we can get more points from Renown and maybe get to 70 points or even more for extra passives. So this should be good to jumpstart your endgame grind. I have also made a couple of spreadsheets, one that contains all my builds and one that can be used as a kind of skill tree guide, and maybe even as a mini build calculator that contains legendary aspects and so on. So if you want to check those out, look for the links in the description. And I hope you enjoyed this setup. Buckle up and let's go. I like starting with the skill trees, but to avoid any confusion, I do not make my builds starting from the bottom. In fact, the way I make my builds is okay, let's pick a specialization. I pick the specialization I like. For example, in this case, I picked Essus Ferocity. There was Warmth and Essus Ferocity that synergizes with Burning and with Fire. But I was like, okay, I want to build around Essus Ferocity and keep that in mind. I don't pick my specialization based on the skills. I pick the skills based on the specialization. So this is a Essus Ferocity build. And I normally pick the ultimate and the specialization together. Once I've decided on the ultimate and the specialization, then I start filling the rest. So this build uses Firebolt, Fireball, Flame Shield, with optional swapping out Flame Shield for teleport. I've put green numbers for the skills I would take. And then Hydra. I think it's a good fun thing. And Meteor, which gives the build the name, the Starfall, the falling comet, the falling star. Um, in my opinion, I mean, we're not. It's not actually a star that's falling; it's a meteor, but it fits. Inferno is the ultimate, as I mentioned. So first of all, Essus Ferocity. Multiplicative increased damage is dealt to increased burning damage is dealt to enemies over 50% life, and multiplicative increased pyromancy skill damage to enemies under 50% life. I decided to make this the priority. Rather than focusing on the burning, which we still have plenty of, I decided to focus on the enemies that are under 50% life. Especially considering that bosses become very nasty at the 66% and 33% mark in most games, and in other games under 50% or under 25% or whatever. So I'd rather focus on that extra bonus, not when starting the fight, but rather and being the direct damage bonus, but rather when the fight is getting in the prolonged state for elites and bosses, because trash mobs would probably die pretty quickly. Now, what we do have here with Inferno is um, it starts burning enemies for 8 seconds and then explodes, deals extra damage to enemies on the outer edge. And you put that in a target area. So you don't put it on enemies themselves, you put them on a target area, but the burning, if they're inside will keep burning them, but you gotta make sure they're inside, and that might be difficult, but still probably doable if you take advantage of things like Flame Shield for a few seconds. Now, enemies inside the Inferno's final explosion are immobilized for 4 seconds. So that's very great synergy for certain things you'll see later. Killing a burning enemy reduces Inferno's cooldown by 1 second, regardless whether it's killed with Inferno or not, which is lovely. Accumulated fresh, burning enemies deal reduced damage. I think this is good for the survivability, and it opens up the upgrade path over here and here. You can even take this one, but again, we don't know how many skill points we'll have exactly when the game is fully released, so I decided to focus on these burning effects lasting longer, so that this lasts longer and other things last longer. You deal multiplicative increased strike damage per nearby burning enemy. So the longer the enemies are burning, the longer this will be happening for us. And this is nice. I mean, obviously this one is good, getting extra attack speed, which also increases casting speed, mind you, in this game. But I think it's not pick one or the other. You can pick both, but in case where we need points, I'd rather pick this one and sacrifice this one. And if we have extra skill points, maybe later come back to it, but there's more important things to come back to, as you'll see later. Meteor, classical skill. A big massive chunk, blazing rock, falling from the sky, burning the ground. And if it hits 3 or more enemies, there is a 30% chance additional one falls on the same location. And I decided to make it fall 30% faster and cost less mana, rather than immobilize again. We can immobilize with this, we can immobilize with some other things. If you think you want extra immobilize, then okay, you can take this, but I think this is better. So it falls faster before the enemies move out of range. What we have here is the Hydra. I'm not sure how many Hydras we can have, but I think as long as you have mana, you probably could summon quite a few of them. Hydras last for an additional 4 seconds with this one, so that makes it from 8 to 12. Unless this 8 here is with those 12 included. It remains to be seen. Once we are in the beta, I'll know the exact numbers and change a lot of things. Hydra also burns enemies for additional percent of its base damage over 6 seconds. We want that burning to trigger things like that and that. There's also an option after you critically strike, Hydras gain attack speed. But again, I'd rather take this because this is overall boost to the build rather than just for the Hydras. And rather than relying on crit strikes, that's just all the time. This passive align the elements, you gain damage reduction against elites. For each second you don't take damage from any of these sources. Up to 50%. I'm not sure what counts as these sources, most likely elites. Or maybe elemental damage in general, but this is good maxed out, and this opens up those two. And every time you spend 100 mana, you gain damage reduction for 5 seconds, which is lovely. And we have ways to get more mana. Using a skill with cooldown grants 10% of your maximum life as a barrier for 5 seconds. Well, we don't have many as a cooldown skill, but there's Inferno. And then there is Flame Shield or Teleport if you replace Flame Shield with Teleport. I personally would prefer Teleport. But for the sake of having the synergy in this build, I invested into Flame Shield. But I personally would sacrifice the immunity and defensive capabilities of Flame Shield and take the mobility of Teleport, which also gives us some defensive capabilities, and it also has shorter cooldown. And if I were to take Teleport, I would put those 5 points here, this 1 point here, and this 1 point there, just to keep you informed about that. Now, Fireball, classical skill in games. You're hurling a Fireball, but there is an alternative skill you can use. If you don't like Fireball, you have the Beam, Incinerate, which has great synergies. And if you do take Incinerate, you might want to take the Destructive Incinerate. I have written about this up here. You'll see it later when talking about aspects. But when it comes to Firebow, costing 10 less mana, it's already a big chunk of mana, 50, now making it 40, not so bad. But still, fire builds actually are mana hawks in terms of core skills and so on. So greater Firebow, when you cast one Firebow while healthy, meaning above 80% of your HP, it has 50% chance, 50% increased radius and deals 20% increased critical strike damage. Very, very decent. Otherwise, it can do multiplicative increased damage to the first enemy hit, but I'd rather take that one for more AoE and crit strike damage. Now, this one is good. Your non-physical resistances are increased. There's also other things you can invest into, but again, with that limited amount of points, there's only so many passives you can take. I hope everything is clear why I took what I took. Let's move on to the next segment. Here we are at the legendary aspects, legendary powers segment. I like starting with a quick summary of what legendary aspects are, how they work, how to get them. When you kill enemies, when you loot chests or other sources that give you drops, you can get a legendary item. And if you get a legendary item, every legendary item has their own legendary aspect, which is kind of like a special legendary only affix. But the special thing about those aspects are you can move them from one item onto another item. And this is done as long as they are in the same category, which is defensive, offensive, mobility, utility, and resource. So as long as something is within this category, for example, helmet, chest, boots, gloves, and amulet, I can move it from one item to the other. In this case, let's take aspect of seared flesh, which is a utility aspect. You can move it from the helmet, amulet, chest, gloves, or boots, regardless of what. You can find it on one item and then put it on another. For example, let's say we need it on the gloves, but we find it on the helmet. Okay, move it around. It happens. Now there's another second bit of information about legendary aspects. You can get the minimum rows of legendary aspects from dungeons. So this one does between it lets meteor do increased crit strike damage between 35 and X% multiplicative to healthy targets. Well, this can be made this can be farmed. You go to Hawazar and you go to the specific dungeon, which right now is unknown, and you can kill the final boss of the dungeon, finish the dungeon, and then in a user interface called Codex of Power, you unlock this permanently to stay there as a available minimum row of the thingy. But that doesn't mean that if you apply this on an item, every single stat will be minimum row. Just the aspect itself will be the minimum row. You can still try to find the better version by hunting, farming mobs, and whatever. But it's a good way to get to fill a build, to patch up a build with the missing links, with the missing aspects, while then later start farming for the better road aspects from actual drops. Now, hope this is clear. Now, I'll quickly go through the recommended aspects for each SWOT and explain why I took them. Incendiary aspect. Actually, let's start with the resources. Incendiary aspect. Sorcerer specific aspect. I've by the way here there is a short list of some of the sorcerer aspects I think fit and some of the universal aspects I believe fit well into the build. So Incendiary is good. Killing a burning enemy grants mana cost reduction for 4 seconds up to X multiplicative percent. This will be happening a lot with this build. Another class specific resource we're taking is Prodigy aspect. Casting an ultimate skill restores mana, which gives you the capability to start spamming right away. And then we have Umbro, which is a universal, very solid for builds with crowd control. And we will have crowd control such as immobilizing and slowing with this setup. Now moving on to Shared Misery. It's a good synergy, especially considering we are taking Umbro. So when you crowd control an enemy, there is X% chance for that to spread to nearby unaffected enemies, which will result in even more resource generation from from those crowd control procs. Now, what else do we have? We have something called Aspect of Might. By the way, don't look at those things. I need to change them. I need to change them after recording this video. I will change all those aspects here because they don't actually match. The green and the red don't match. The other ones do match. So Aspect of Might is one very sleeper good universal all classes thing. If you want a mana regeneration, and this is a mana hog build with fireball costing 40, 50 without that, you would want the basic skills to be faster. So never mind that. My bad. I was talking about rapid aspect. Rapid aspect. So let's talk about aspect of might. After that, rapid aspect. So aspect of might is damage reduction additive 25% when using a basic skill. Very easy, nice way to proc. Another very good defensive thing that you want to consider here is where did it go? It's this one, the damage reduction to enemies that have damage over time effects on them. So this is extremely useful to that setup. So if you feel like, okay, actually I've added it here, there it is. If you feel like you don't want aspect of might, you can have this, but this is 20% minimum, whereas this is 25%. This doesn't seem to go for more than 25%. This probably does go all the way to 30 or maybe even more. This one lasts only for 4 seconds, but it's applied on you, whereas the other thing is applied on the enemies. So I think this is the better out of the two, but you might end up making a build where you stack both of them by reworking certain things, removing certain things. Now let's talk about seared flesh and shared misery. Actually, I did talk about shared misery, but I didn't talk about seared flesh. Seared flesh is a very good utility. Every 5 times you deal direct damage to an enemy, they are immobilized for 2 seconds, which again, great synergy with this crowd control, with shared misery and with Umbro. So I think it fits very nicely into that setup. Moving on to the red stuff, to the offensive stuff, we have Aspect of 3 Curses. And I've put it on the amulet, which means it gets 50% stronger. So this 35% minimum will be 35% plus 50% of 35, which is what, 17.5 extra percent added crit strike damage. Again, multiplicative and again, healthy targets, which means enemies that are above 80% HP. So if you think, okay, I don't want Aspect of 3 Curses to be the one on the amulet slot, you can put other things such as Aspect of Control, which brings us to it. You deal more damage to immobilize, stunned, or frozen enemies. And we will have immobilized thanks to this, and thanks to shared to shared misery, spreading it to other enemies. And as I mentioned, there are ways to get extra immobilized by swapping out this one here. And then also Inferno immobilizes even as it is without swapping anything out. And it's for 4 seconds as well. So good synergies. You won't have much stunned, if any at all. You won't have much frozen, if any at all. Actually, yeah, you definitely won't have frozen. Unless playing with others. And this is where this build can shine, if you play with others who stun and freeze a lot. But even without them, it's good. Now, this and this, again, good synergies together. Now, moving on to this as an alternative choice. If you swap out Fireball for Incinerate, consider this maybe instead of that one. It's up to you where to put it, but it's alternative, and that's only if you want the beam build. But if you want the beam build, you might want to take the stuff that gives you extra damage while standing still. Because with beam builds you have to stand still, you can't walk in build. Unfortunately, I'm still waiting for someone to make a game where you can beam while walking. Now we talked about rapid aspect earlier, but I didn't fully explain it. Basic skills: granting attack speed, which means faster mana generation. It really helps with fireball. and other things that cost mana like Hydra and Meteor. Hopefully this is clear. There's a lot of other things that you can consider, like efficiency, maybe instead of rapid aspect. And if you're using two-handed will have 100% efficiency. So this is something to consider. 100% efficiency, this one is 50% efficiency. You might end up moving this one here if you use two-handed, but that means you're sacrificing rapid. And that's why I put rapid there, because some people might want to sacrifice rapid and then put aspect of control here, put three curses there, and just have that 100%. So this 35% will be 70%. Rather than 35 plus 17.5 or whatever. I think it's clear. As for the mobility, I prefer Ghost Walker. Especially if shit hits the fan and you're surrounded by a bunch of enemies, I'd rather have this than the extra mobility, movement speed. If you're using teleport, the movement speed might be better than this one though. Keep that in mind. To get notified when I upload more content like this one or other builds and guides for Wooter and not so Wooter games, you can subscribe to my channel and hit that bell button to not miss out on notifications. As well as keep in mind there's something called memberships on YouTube, which lets you be a paying member for my channel to get access to perks such as emotes and badges made by me, as well as the option to get one-on-one tutoring for the very basics of Adobe Photoshop, Premiere and After Effects. And memberships can be cancelled at any time if you no longer want to be a member. Thanks for watching all the way until the end, Struck Web. Keep it cool until next time, and goodbye.